It's Ethan. Sorry. I just tried to make it. Well, I made a video earlier about my trip home and airports, and tried to do it all in one video. But I went back and watched it, and I'm gonna split it up in two. So for those of you who want to hear about airports, this is what this is going to be about: airports, airport security, stuff like that. My experience with that on the trip home. And then I'll make a video, part two, I guess you can call it, about the trip home itself and dealing with family. So, for airports, I flew from Seattle to the West Coast, or to the East Coast, to the South, and then later on, I spent 5 days there, and then later on I flew north to New York, and spent some time there, and then I flew back to Seattle. So nice big triangle. Anyway, so 3 times I had to go through airport security, and I was pretty nervous all 3 times, really. You know, a lot of anxiety around traveling, and I talked about that in my last video I made. But yeah, certainly like the ID cards and what do I look like and what are people perceiving me as, and bathrooms, and the one thing I didn't think about is binding. Holy cow, like seriously, if you don't have to bind, or you can avoid binding while you're flying, don't. I mean, seriously, don't do it, because it was so tight and uncomfortable, and like, I don't know, my feet kind of swell a little bit during flights, and I felt like I realized this time, like my upper body kind of, I don't know if it was me really swelling, but it was seriously uncomfortable. It felt like the thing got tighter the whole time. And mostly that was like the whole coast to coast flights that I did. Those were the worst. Those are like 12, 13, 14-hour days. So that obviously exceeds the recommended time you're in a binder. Not healthy, probably, and super, super uncomfortable. In fact, when I was flying home yesterday, I wanted to rip that thing off. I can't even tell you how bad it felt. It was almost unbearable, and I was getting irritated. And you know, I tried in the seat I was at. I had a window seat, so I kept trying to like turn and pull my binder out, like so I can breathe for a few minutes. So I was like scrunched forward and like pulling it out, and the poor girl next to me probably was like, what the heck is this kid doing? Like, you know, and I think she thought I was a teenage boy, so, you know, she's probably like, this ridiculous, do you have ADHD? I'm sure she wanted to ask. I don't know, like, I could not sit still. It's super, super uncomfortable. I can't even describe it. I was having like a panic attack wearing it. Yeah, not good. So if you can avoid binding when you're flying or traveling like that, do it. It'll help you. Yeah, so that's binding. Getting through airport security was not as bad as I had imagined it was going to be. Nobody asked me anything about the tea that I had, because I brought it in my carry-on and just took it out, put it in the little trays that they give you. Nobody really looked at it, I don't think. I didn't see anybody looking at it. I didn't get asked about it, so that was nice. And I went through the scanners. I went through like all 3 different types of scanning. I mean, the ones that's just like a basic metal detector thing, and then the one where you like put your hands up over your head and stand there while the thing does a full body scan on you. And then there was one other version. So nothing really came up out of it. There was the one time it was an issue was I had worn a shirt that didn't really hide my binder very well. On one of the trips, and like you can kind of see a ring a little bit. If I wear the wrong kind of shirt, you can kind of see a ring from the top of the binder, and I try to mess with the binder, but I don't know, I can't seem to get that to go away sometimes. So he, like the guy that weighed me through the little detector, like, it's like, hold on, I'm gonna have to do a pat down. He's like, are you wearing a chain? I was like, no, I'm not wearing a chain. Like, don't you think the metal detector would have gone off? But you know, I wasn't a smart ass with him, but I was just like, no, it's an undershirt thing. And so he was just like, okay, well, he just patted my chest down like this. It was weird. I don't know. So I got a little apprehensive then, and I'm sure like then he was probably uncomfortable. So I don't know. It was not a fun experience, and I just kind of quickly left after he gave me the go ahead and grabbed my stuff and walked off. But other than that, not too bad. I didn't like having to hand my ID card to to the people at the flight desk or wherever you check in to get your tickets, and then also at the beginning of security where they check your name against your boarding pass. That was a little uncomfortable. Because the one time I walked up to the desk where I was checking in, and the woman was like, "Oh, can you help this guy?" to the lady behind the counter, and she was like, "Yeah, sure, no problem. Where is he going?" And I was like, "I'm going blah wherever," and it was all he until I handed her my ID card, and then after that it was still kind of like, she didn't gender me. I don't know. So I'm sure it threw her. Didn't apologize though, or say ma'am or miss, which was nice, but still I could tell there was some confusion. But after that, really, like I was getting on the airplane, like had to give my boarding pass to the woman that scanned it or whatever, and she was like, she grabbed it, looked at it, scanned it, and was like, "Welcome to the flight, Mr." my last name. And I was like, "You didn't see the first name?" Like, I don't know. My name is not like, it's not confusing. It's definitely a girl's name, so it's not gender ambiguous for sure. Yeah, but that was cool that she called me Mr. My last name. I enjoyed that. That was cool. I was like texting some of my friends about it, like I got called Mr. Z, whatever. So that was exciting. But I feel like a lot of the time I was being perceived as a teenage boy, which I didn't quite realize until like people were interacting with me a little bit more, and like some of the flight attendants would be like, "Hey, honey," or one of the guys is like, "Hey, buddy, you want to sit here?" or whatever. Because on Southwest, apparently you can seat yourself, or at least on the flight I was on. But he sat me next to another employee who was traveling with her daughter, and her and I got into a really good discussion, which was good because that was the worst. That flight was the one going north when I was already on the East Coast, and I was having a really tough time. Mostly I wanted to come home and not go up north, and two, because I was towards the end of my shot cycle, and sometimes I feel like I kind of don't feel as masculine towards the end of my shot cycle. It's like the T is wearing off. So I was really uncomfortable and feeling like I wasn't being read correctly, even though nobody was really misgendering me or gendering me anyway. But yeah, just having a normal conversation with somebody was very relaxing. But the guy that got up and gave me, he was sitting there just holding a spot, but he was one of the flight attendants, and so he was like, "I'm not sitting here, you can sit here, bud." And he looks at the other woman, the female employee who was just on the flight, and he was like, "I got a nice young man for you here." I'm like, "Oh god." So I sat down next to her, and like she asked me a few like basic questions to start off with, and I was giving her really brief answers, trying to be short, and I found myself like thinking like, how do I interact with this woman? Like, she's obviously seeing me as like this 16-year-old boy, probably 16, 17-year-old boy, probably, and like I'm like, how would I act if I was a 16-year-old boy? And so I just kind of was like, yep, yeah, and then like she kept kind of talking, and her daughter was really what got me started. Like, she was 5, and she kind of looked around the seat, and she said something to her mom, and her mom was like, "You can tell him," and she, I was like, "Oh, hey," when I started asking her questions, I was like, "What's your name?" And she's like, "Oh, it's this," and I was like, "Oh, cool. Well, my name's Ethan," and, it went from there, and, like, her mother and I were talking quite a bit, off and on throughout the flight, but I realized, like, as we're talking, like, you can perceive me as a 16-year-old, but once you start talking to me, like, I'm not talking about things that a 16-year-old is going to talk about. She was asking questions about like where I was going, and I told her it was where I grew up, and she was asking some more leading kind of questions. Like, I think she was trying to get a gauge of my actual age, and you know, I was like, yeah. Eventually, I was like, I'm not as young as I look. I'm actually 27. And she's like, oh, okay. I think she'd asked if I was going to college or something, and I was like, no, I'm well past college age. And she was like, really? Like, I mean, not that I can go back to college, obviously, but I'm 27 years old, so yeah, I'm not your undergrad for sure. So that was fun, and then the conversation was fine still after that. Although I'm pretty sure at some point she said she to her daughter, referring to me, even though she didn't know either way. But she corrected herself, and it didn't. Maybe she didn't slip, but I kind of thought she had. So I think I kind of had a feeling that she picked up on the fact that I was trans, but didn't say anything. Very nice. She kept it really nice. Called me Ethan the whole time. Even left her daughter with me while she was on the flight, just flying. I guess she had just gotten done with a previous flight that she was working on, and so this was just her flight home with her daughter. And she got up to help serve drinks and snacks, and she's like, "Would you mind watching her for me?" And I was like, "No, that's fine." So we talked. Her daughter and I talked, and I kept her company while she was gone. But yeah, I mean, it was fine. Like, she trusted me enough to leave her daughter with me. I guess not that you really have a choice, but like, I wasn't some stranger. I mean, I am a stranger to her. So, and at the end, she turned to her daughter, and right before we were getting ready to get off the plane, and she said something. Why don't you tell him about this? She whispered something to her, and she was like, "Oh, I'm adopted." She's like, I have another mom and dad, and I came out of the other mom's stomach." And I was like, "Oh," I said, sometimes that happens, but that's interesting. That's cool. And she was really excited to tell me that, and so I kind of felt like that was the mother's way of reaching out and being like, we're all kind of different, and I don't know. Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't, but it was just a nice conversation, and I'm glad I got to sit next to her. But yeah, so, but yeah, it's just strange being interacted with as a young man when I think at a different level. And I feel like I'm pretty mature on top of it in most cases, so I really am not like a 16-year-old boy. Although some of my thought processes are starting to be a little interesting, and I'll save that for changes videos. But anyway, yeah. But in general, like, even when we were out in public, not at the airport, like, I was being interacted with as a young man, like a teenage boy, which is strange. I don't know. So, yeah, so for flights, that's about it. The only other thing left to talk about, I guess, is bathrooms. Airport bathrooms. I had said in my previous video I was trying to plan to use the bathroom on the plane. That happened once. I realized I had put myself in window seats, and I don't really want to climb across people or make them move on flights, and I didn't really have to pee on the plane. So I did have to use terminal, or the airport bathrooms a couple times, and it was actually fine. I walked in, the first one I walked into, it was like empty for the most part. But what I found is that airport bathrooms have a lot of stalls. Like, they had like 10 stalls in a row, and a few urinals. Actually, less urinals in the stalls, but anyway, that was nice. And I realized, like, people were just going into the stalls anyway. Like, men were just going into the stalls over the urinals. So that was kind of nice to realize. But yeah, I just, I kept it short, walked in, got out, did my business, and, nobody said anything. So yeah, not a bad experience there either. Although, again, I would still prefer to use a porta potty. But yeah, I think that's about it for airports. The only other thing that I found is I was really afraid to bring my needles and syringes onto the plane because I didn't know if that would be okay, even if I put it on my check bag. So I didn't. But what I found is, at least at the Walmart that was near my grandparents, I could get, you could buy like 10 needles and syringes without a prescription. So thank God, I got my needles there, and I only needed to do one shot, so that was fine. And it was cheap. It was like 60 cents for 2. She gave me like 4 because I was trying to explain to her that I needed one size needle to draw with and one to actually inject with, and she just gave me a bunch of, gave me 4, 2 of each kind. Like, that's not really what I was looking for, but whatever. It works. It works. It's good. Those I did bring back with me on my check bag, and the 2 I didn't use, and I was fine. I didn't see anything about the TSA inspecting my bag, so I'm assuming it went through without problem. I just kept it in the Walmart pharmacy bag with the receipt, and they were still in their packaging. So, you know, yeah, maybe other people fly with that. I guess I should have researched that more beforehand, but it wasn't a problem. So, yeah, that was good. Yeah, that's about it for airports, unless somebody has a question or anything else. But seriously, the biggest thing I learned was don't bind if you don't have to on the plane. I feel like I have to, though. I'm less and less comfortable now going out without a binder on. Not that I really did much before, but I could have stood it a little bit better before, but now I can't. I felt like I had to. So, yeah, but if you don't have to, don't. It is really painful. And I hope I didn't do any like permanent damage to like my diaphragm area. That's where I felt it the most, like right in as I'm sitting in that seat, I guess. I don't know. So, lesson learned. Try not to wear that, but I understand it's a point of comfort for most people, so probably wouldn't happen. Yeah. So, hope that helps somebody. Yeah, that's it. I'll do the family video next.